Alrighty, it is currently 7:25 p.m. on October 21st, 2024, and this is Some Idiot Reads. Now, this is actually a bit of a special one here for me to go ahead and do. I actually did. I had. Well, first and foremost, if you're interested in actually getting to the reading portion, I'll go ahead and have a little marker, for chapters and all that. So feel free to skip on ahead. But while I take my moment to ramble, which will not be all that long, I assure you, I actually did have Somebody It Reads recorded as of literally last Wednesday. I held off on uploading it because I didn't want to wind up uploading with the same day that I was doing the missed upload, and then the weekend happened and it was a long, good weekend. And I was like, I'll just upload it on Sunday. But I happened to see that Coyote did a new dispatch, and it was one that, as I understand it, at the moment I have not read it. I specifically held off on reading it. I want to have a fresh view for this when going in to read it. But it's one that he had expressed was of very personal importance to him. Was a really impressionable, that's the wrong word, was a very serious one for him. So, this was a case where, doubly so, I wanted to make sure that I had his permission before going in and giving this a read, and doing so in this format, which has been secured. Thank you very much, my dude. And it is my sincerest hope that, for as much as this piece does mean to you, that I do this a appropriate amount of justice for an actual read through. Like, I'm saying that directly to you, buddy. So hopefully this is hopefully this doesn't suck. But so the dispatch, this is going to be a little bit out of order. The Somebody It Reads that I had recorded last Wednesday was supposed to come out yesterday, Sunday, but is now going to be pushed back until probably Wednesday. It's like I can space stuff out a little bit. But yeah, so that's where that all is at. So if anyone that watches any of these that sees like, oh, this is a little weird and disjointed, that's why. But I'm not going to harp on too terribly long for this one. I want to keep this short and sweet for the intro portion. Because I was going to wind up... I have an entire spiel about it in the one that will be coming up next. But suffice to say, hey, right now, Coyote's book, American Mystic, Life, Death, Rebirth of Jimmy Wonderful. I think I've got that right. I probably don't. I'm going to have a link in the description. Go buy a copy of it. It's fucking awesome. I had an opportunity to read some of the start of that. It is well worth every fucking penny. If you enjoyed... the short form version, it's gonzo journalism. If you liked Transmetropolitan, if you liked Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, if you thought Hunter S. Thompson was cool, you should read this shit. That's about all I got for that one. But it's awesome. It's amazing. Link will be in the description. Definitely go check it out. Buy a fucking copy. It's fucking amazing. All right. Anyway. So. Sure here. All right, so I did misunderstand. It was not written recently. I just now noticed the timestamp on this. This was uploaded last year, or at least I think it was. I don't know. Anyway, in any event, here we go. The Last Ride of Pride's Imperial Prince. We got here a fantastic Coyote drawing, which, if I do recall correctly, let me check here. Off the side. It is that is for anyone that might be curious about the image itself. If you're looking at the screen now, that image is not AI generated. That is a hand drawn piece of frickin' art I'm not sure what name I should be providing for that or any particular links, but you know what? I'm gonna find out about that, and that will also be in the description. I'm gonna leave a note to myself real quick to remember. Make sure to get link info for Coyote, for doggo drawing at beginning of read. Good deal. Okay. But that is a phenomenal piece of work right there. Really setting a good stage. Okay. I was 6 years old the first time I was ever placed on the back of a horse. Sonny the pony was purchased for me by my father at my mother's insistence, as Sonny was on his way to being sold to make soap. Sonny's former owner, Von Slick, I assume this was not his Christian name, for if it was, Slick is surely the most on-the-nose horse trader name I have ever heard, had taken $600 in exchange for the pony's life. As soap ingredients, Sonny would have fetched $400. He'd already been loaded onto the trailer to take him off to his fate. He's too old. Damn thing won't take a step unless you spur him, and even then he's too slow for trail riding. Von Slick, who I remember only as a roughly shaven, narrow face looming atop a denim coat, groused by the car window. I was ecstatic with this prospect, in the way that all children would be overjoyed with such news. As was my mother, for not only had she found an old pony that was surely too broken down to be a fuss, but she had also saved that pony. My mother loved horses more than she loved sunsets, all the fine things men could give a beautiful woman, or all the luxuries wealth might provide. She loved it more. I read that so wrong. She loved horses more than she loved sunsets, all the fine things men could give a beautiful woman, or all the luxuries wealth might provide. She had grown up with a horse beneath her in the small mining town of Wheelwright, Kentucky, as a constant companion, and had never lived without one. To her, the sweetest melodies ever written of love or God could not hold a candle to the morning nickering of a hungry horse, and no perfume ever sold on the streets of Paris could compete with the earthly scent of a barn full of Tennessee walkers. When she had left her life as a registered nurse working the ER in one of the bloodiest portions of eastern Appalachia following my birth, she'd taken up horse training. She could, with a glance, discern a horse's breed and any ailments with unerring accuracy. She prided herself not only on her connection to the animals, but her ability to sculpt them into winners that they needed to be in order to prove themselves worthy of the money spent on them. The last thing a horse can ever afford to be is unprofitable. If they are, they end up like poor Sonny the pony. Sonny the pony? No, it'd be Sonny the pony. I can still remember my father cinching up the girth that cut beneath the pony's belly, and my mom promising she wouldn't let go of the lead until I was ready. The concept wasn't that difficult to understand, even as a small child. Tug left, and the horse goes left. You tug right, and the horse will go right. If you pull back gently, the horse slowly stops, and if you loosen your hold on the reins, the horse will go faster. Easy breezy, lemon squeezy. Now, just as Von Slick had predicted, Sonny moved with all the speed of cold molasses. He was in no hurry at all, and seemingly paid no mind to the fact that he had a skinny little snot-nosed kid on his back. I was delighted, and if my first ride had concluded after that first go round the stretch, this would have been a wonderful memory. It did not. All right, are you ready to try it on your own? The smile on her face, the way the joy jumped up in the Coke bottle green of her eyes, and the sly happiness in her voice are still burned into my memory. I nodded. I was ready. My mother unhooked the nylon lead, and I, at 6 years old and weighing less than a sackful of taters, was in control of an animal that was easily 800 pounds. Sonny was just a pony, and an old one at that, but his tawny coat and caramel mane more than made up for that in my eyes. I clucked my tongue, as I'd heard my father and mother do when I'd watched them ride innumerable times before that day, and I gave him a little prod with my heels. Off we went. The ride was delightful. A horse is not a dog or a cat. They are not pets. They are mounts. And that is an entirely different relationship with an animal. On the back of even the smallest pony, you are more than you were, and you exist in a state of balance with that creature. A good horse is not a blind slave to its rider, and a good rider is not just owner, but friend to the horse that carries him. You may love a cat, and he may keep your kitchen free of mice. You may love a dog, and he might alert you in the night. But a horse holds your life upon its back. They're smarter than most people I've known, and there are few feelings that linger with you like their acceptance. Sonny was trotting along, his speed picking up a little faster than that he'd displayed when my mother had been leading him. Now, if you had heard my mother tell this story, this is the part of the tale where she would have knocked the ashes from her cigarette, leaned forward, and told you, very seriously, "Started to think that old thing lied about the damn pony." Two things happened at once in the closing moments of my first ride. Firstly, our equine star of this brief tale, Sonny the pony, decided that he was not going to be defined by the opinions of others. Age was, as they say, just a number, and if Sonny was supposed to be too old to run, then nobody had given him that memo. A horse bolting beneath you can be a frightening experience that challenges both your skill and your mettle. When you're still a sprat, and you're on the back of your first horse, it's absolutely shit your pants terrifying. Compounding this unfolding drama was an oversight on my father's part. He had failed to properly tighten up the girth around Sonny's underside. This meant the saddle was not held upright, which became very alarming when it turned upside down. My feet were still in the stirrups. Oh, okay, I'm good. So, my first memory on a horse had rapidly become that of observing my father and mother, upside down, as they chased after this pony. I can just remember my mom outpacing my father as they tried to run down Sonny, and while I cannot be for certain, I am inclined to believe that pony took their ageism personally. As a brief aside, I've been on a horse a handful of times in my life, never really as the one in control. So this is, but I can kind of visualize it. So that's cool. I like this. But one thing that came to mind for me reading this, particularly with the saddle flipping upside down portion, I'm remembering when, honestly, I was probably around like 6. My mom could probably tell you better on that one. We went canoeing when I was a kid, like every summer. Well, not every summer, every spring break. We would always go canoeing. And when we did so, like as the years went on, like eventually, like at the start, it was like my mom and my dad in one canoe. And then after my brother and sister were born, okay, so no, I had to have been like, anyway, as they got older, eventually it was me and my dad in the canoe. And like my dad taught me how to paddle in a canoe, and just, I have a lot of good memories there. But the point is, there was one time I remember very distinctly that my mom was in the front of the canoe, my dad was in the back of the canoe, and I was in the middle. And something happened. I don't know what caused it. I don't know to this day why. But I distinctly remember something happening and the canoe flipped. Which generally shouldn't and doesn't happen. But I remember very clearly, I'm sitting in the canoe, I feel it start to flip, I'm holding on tightly to the sides, it flips upside down, and for a brief moment, I am just staring outward. I'm blonde-haired, just staring out into this tea-stained water. And then the canoe comes back up and around, and I look around, and the cooler is gone, my mom is gone, my dad is gone, and I'm just sitting here in the middle of the woods in a canoe, just, Mom? Dad? And then, of course, they pop back up, but it was a formative moment that stuck with me, and just, again, the whole thing of just like, oh, the saddle going upside down, aside from, Thinking back to Robin Hood Men in Tights, fun movie, and the moment in there with a upside down saddle on a horse. That is one thing that just came to mind for me. So, random side anecdote. Anyway, eventually, Sonny stopped of his own volition, and I squirmed my feet from the stirrups and fell into a crying heap on the grass. I cannot express to you the level of unbridled, filthy, murderous swearing that came from her mouth toward both my father and Von Slick. If you believe that a sailor is the pinnacle of cursing, or that a long-haul trucker has a filthy mouth, then you have not had the misfortune of finding yourself on the wrong end of an Appalachian woman's fury. I pride myself on writing compelling, and oftentimes shocking, dialogue. There is nothing that I could do to replicate that. In my memory, it isn't even words. It's just the X-Men character Banshee peeling a man with a sonic scream at point-blank range. That wouldn't be my last time on the back of a horse, nor was Sonny our only equine companion. Kentucky is horse country, and some estimate that there is a feral horse population of over 3,000 in these mountains alone. We're America's lead producer of horses. The equine industries are an integral part of our state's agribusiness dynamic. Besides, as my mother used to say, you can't have just one. Among our stables was a racking horse named Cotton's Dream, a bruiser of a horse that belonged to my father, and the slightly smaller, but much more prestigious, Pride's Imperial Prince. Now, Pride was a close competitor with me for my mother's affections. He was a Tennessee walking horse, built to be smooth rather than fast, and in his veins was the blood of champions. These were not race horses, they were show horses. But the show circuit can be just as cutthroat and nail-bitingly competitive as its racing counterpart. Pride's Imperial Prince, with his 3 white stocking feet and his coat as black as coal dust, was small for a walker. He was chosen by my mother after his gelding, or is it gelding? Let me know in the comments. After his gelding, for that very reason. Sheila loved an underdog. I didn't know it then, but that animal would come to represent both some of her greatest triumphs and, eventually, transcend its place as a mount so that it might keep her dreams themselves alive. Not only was my mother a horse trainer, she often competed in the Kentucky Horse Show Association events, as well as competitions for the prestigious National Walking Horse Association of America, and innumerable small shows that did not count toward her national standing. On the back of Pride's Imperial Prince, my mother was elevated to the position of a national champion. She and Pride would go on to win the Kentucky Celebrations Flat-Shod Walking Horse Championship, defeating 16 of the finest horses and riders from across the state to earn her spot in the Grand Championship held in Decatur, Alabama. For those who do not know what a horse show is, or may be confusing it with the sport of horse racing or other equestrian competitions such as jumping or barrel racing, a horse show has nothing to do with speed. Anywhere from 5 to 30 horses and riders compete at one time, completing a circular route around the ring. The criteria used for their judgment and the determination of a winner varies depending on the class and breed of the horse. For a Tennessee walking horse, like Pride's Imperial Prince, he was judged on the height with which he brought his front feet up, commonly known as the step of a horse, and how low he sat in the back end. A Tennessee walking horse, when moving in a show gait, should sit as low as possible in the back end. The horse must be calm, the horse must be graceful, and the horse must respond quickly to the rider's commands. The riders themselves are judged by their poise, their calm, and the neatness of their attire. If a rider wishes to win, he or she must never appear ruffled or caught off guard while on the back of their mount. And there is a picture of a gorgeous horse. So pretty. Big money is paid out to the winners. Oftentimes in a Kentucky Horse Show Association show, sometimes known as Blue Book shows, because of the blue books given out at the beginning of the year that state their locations and starting standings for registered competitors, could sometimes pay out as much as $2,000. while the so-called unaffiliated shows could pay as little as 50 to 300 per win. The prize money is nothing compared to the monetary gain that can be earned by a horse trainer who wins big. Rich people love to pay for only the best for their horses, and this includes top dollar fees that a winning horse trainer can demand. I don't think my mom did it for the money, though. In fact, I'm positive that she didn't. She would go to any horse show, whether it was big or small, just for the thrill of competing and letting Pride's Imperial Prince do what he was seemingly born to do. Many was the poor country rider who cursed his fate when he found himself in the ring with this world champion caliber animal and its fair-haired rider sitting tall in the saddle in her prim black habit. Mom celebrated each of these victories in her own sly way, gathering with her friends and bits of our family, the ones who had come to see her compete at least, behind the horse trailer after she'd won. When the congratulations had concluded, she would take the blue ribbon and tack it to the inside of the changing room door on our horse trailer. The ribbon, freshly won, would find itself with plenty of company, and I can still remember sitting on the floor of that little changing room as a child and playing with the tails of countless ribbons that hung on that door. As for Pride, he would stand calmly at the back of the horse trailer, rewarded for his victory with half an apple and a Budweiser. You might not believe this, but a horse is entirely capable of drinking a beer from a long-neck bottle, provided you've got the manners enough to open it for him, and Pride would hold the bottle between his teeth, throwing his head back so he could down the whole thing. He was an exceptionally gentle animal, and often my mother would let me scrape the sweat off of him or brush his coat as he cooled down. I was particularly fond of climbing onto the side of the horse trailer so I could play with his ears, folding their tips and suggesting to my mother that he was part donkey. Pride tolerated this admirably. I saw a great deal of Appalachia, and no small amount of the South on those long summer nights, riding between my parents and our big Duali truck as we bounced from one horse show to the next. Towns like Monticello, Camden, Paintsville, Harlan, Claiborne, and Stoneleigh all passed by in the velvet black of the mountain's night, separated by days and victories. Unlike the smaller ranked shows, each victory she attained at a Blue Book event added much-needed points to qualify for the Kentucky Championships, and if she was victorious there, she could move on to battle it out in the National Championship. These shows were almost like mini vacations. My parents would load down coolers full of snacks and beverages, pack chairs and tents, even bring the occasional grill. Often it would be several hours before my mother would compete, and my father, who seemed to perpetually come up short in the ring, would use the opportunity to rub elbows with the sort of people willing to drop $20,000 on an animal. He didn't have my mother's skill with the animals, but he never met a group of socialites he couldn't charm. For me, these horse shows are fine examples of early 90s parenting. I was free to roam and run around the huge rural outdoor spaces filled to the brim with horses, trailers, trucks, riders, inevitably a few drunks, and bands of near-wild children. Somehow, I never so much as got my foot stepped on, and, regardless of where the horse show was held, I would typically vanish off to play until I heard them call my mother, and Pride's, name over the PA. The exception to this was when she finally made it to the Kentucky celebration. That time, I sat on my hands like everyone else. All those victories finally added up, and a year before my parents were to divorce, my mother and Pride were set to compete for the state's championship. The pressure of this, the desire to win, was enough to convince my mother to entertain the idea of using an outsider trainer. In all her years around the horse's life, even before she started competing, there was one man who had a reputation for producing winning horses, no matter the cost. He no longer competed and made his entire living training horses for some of the richest clients in not just Appalachia, but the entire United States. In the interest of fairness, we'll call him Bernie Dorset. He'd been banned from Blue Book shows for burning or sounding horses. This cruel practice involves placing caustic chemicals in a wrap around the horse's feet for 24 hours before a show. The result is that the horse will step higher because his goddamn feet will feel like they're on fire. Despite this shame, his results would prove sufficient to outweigh the morals of many of his clients. Horses are noble beasts, but the same cannot be said about all of the men that own them. However, before my mother would turn pride over to Dorset's administrations, she wanted to see the operation for herself. This necessitated a trip to his stables, located in one of the most remote areas of the state. Dorset had built his stables and home atop of a mountain that had its top flattened by strip mining. The land had been reclaimed, and as our truck crested the hill that day, I can remember thinking I'd never seen so much grass. There were no trees or breaks for the wind, just a sea of high Kentucky greenery that stretched out towards the powder blue of the Appalachian sky. The space between Dorset's house and the stables was broken up by a large horse ring that was every bit as big as the ones used for actual competitions. His stables must have held at least 20 horses, and he, along with a smattering of help from paid laborers, tended to them all. I was frightened of Dorset. He was a man who leaned heavily into his own nasty reputation. He was tall and broad, but his stomach protruded outward, as if he had been trying to smuggle a beach ball. He wore dirty gray slacks, and a sweat-stained dress shirt rolled up at the sleeves past his elbows. His head was adorned with a mass of thick, greasy black hair that he pushed back from his eyes when he saw us cresting the hill upon our arrival, and his beard, wild and untrimmed, was heavy with lingering gobs of tobacco spit. He didn't smile, not even at the prospect of having a new client, as he had already had all the money he needed. He had no wife, no children, and there was nothing about the man that suggested he possessed the necessary affections for having them either. I do not recall much, if any, of the small talk that followed. My father was much more impressed by the man and his record than my mother was, and this was still an era where children were seen and not heard. I did, however, follow my parents around like a little duckling and marveled at the interior of his stables. While my mother had a door covered with blue ribbons, Dorset had an entire trophy case that stretched the length of the far end of the stables with his prizes. The trophies, ribbons, and awards were secure behind the locked glass, but I don't think even that could keep the taint of his cheating from tarnishing them. He never even made a point to show them off, never so much as looked at them, even as he led us through the stable. We came to a horse in cross ties, which is 2 chains hooked to either side of the bridle, in order to keep the horse secured in one position. The horse wasn't skinny or dirty. That sort of mistreatment would have devalued the animal, and Dorset's whole business model relied on increasing their value. This horse, this solid black mare that watched us with wide eyes as we passed, made the mistake of leaning its head forward just enough to nip at Dorset's shoulder with his big, flat teeth. Dorset's response was as quick as it was brutal. He turned, and in one motion, struck the horse solidly across the mouth with his fist. Blood and foamy white horse spit went flying as he flew into a brief fit of cursing, only stopping at the nervous laughter of my father. I remember Dorset trying to tug his shirt down over his bulging belly following the strike, and offering up a lukewarm explanation. A horse is too big to feel a little slap. If you don't teach them that, you can hurt them, and they think they can hurt you. My mother sent me away to play. I don't know how long I roamed amidst the high grass, trying to catch jumping insects and turning over the many rocks in the soil, for, though reclaimed, the soil was still heavy with small, loose stones from its time as a mine. But eventually they emerged from the stable. My father and my mother went to the edge of the horse ring as Dorset led a young stallion that tugged and stamped in protest toward the ring. The stallion was too young for showing, but too old to be considered a colt. I'd learned later from my mother that it had been rescued, quote-unquote, from the wild by a Lexington equine enthusiast who wished it to be trained properly. At my distance, we'll say 100 yards away, I could tell that Dorset had something in his right hand, but I couldn't tell what. I assumed, in my childlike mind, that part of the fencing from the ring had broken and he'd just picked it up. It was clearly some length of board, and he probably just wanted to make sure the horse wouldn't step on it or hurt its feet. I was very wrong. The wood was a piece of 2x4, and when Dorset got the horse inside the ring, he released the animal. As he did, the young stallion bolted and began to run circles around the ring at breakneck speed. Dorset simply walked to the center of the horse ring and stood there in the grass, hunk of lumber in hand. And then he waited. Every time the stallion would come in on him, either to try and blow by him or even possibly trample him, He'd haul off and swing the piece of wood like a baseball bat. You could hear the strikes, those big, meaty, solid thuds, each time they made contact with the horse's chest, neck, or face. Each blow was followed by an exclamation of vulgarity and anger, as if he somehow expected the young animal to have been born with any instincts other than those it had. "Yeah, you motherfucker! Yeah! Get your little ass back over here!" Hopefully that did not peek out. I was not looking at the recording. My apologies to those listening. I was doing that for effect. I will try to avoid that in the future. Maybe I can edit it. I don't know. We'll see. My mother turned away and covered her mouth, but my father remained right where he was leaning against the horse's ring and watching. I don't think he was impressed by Dorset. My father was rarely impressed by anyone, but I think he watched for the same reason some people watch a race in hopes of seeing a crash. He certainly wasn't going to stand up and say that it was wrong, and my mother looked as if she would be sick. Please understand that before I tell you what happened next, I am no warrior. I am a writer, and as if to herald this, as a child I was a little scrawny, bookish thing who rarely made a peep. I did not have many friends, and I had yet to learn how to handle bullies. I was taught, from a young age, that children do not buck up to adults. Ever. I was a curly, blonde-haired mouse of a boy that would not have said boo to a goose. Yet, by the time I heard that first smack, something snapped in my young heart. I began to gather rocks, little stones that peppered the landscape beneath that tall, waving grass, and use my shirt as a makeshift bag to hold them. I can remember trying to hurry, trying to cram all those rocks I could into my shirt, because I thought he was going to kill the animal. My fingers were dirty all the way up to the knuckle. I ran, not away, but toward Dorset and the horse ring, the jostle sending a few stones at the top tumbling around my feet. I'd like to tell you that I screamed, "No!" or "Get away from him!" or something dramatic like that, but I don't think I articulated a single coherent word. My approach brought me to the ring on the far side of where my parents were, and I ducked beneath the boards with one of Dorset's laborers going into a mad panic as I blew by him. Once inside the ring, I was in danger of being trampled myself, but that rotten son of a bitch was in rock-throwing range. The first one fell short, but as I continued to close on him, now with my father shouting and my mother screaming, "Oh God, someone get him," the second one struck Dorset between his shoulders, and he turned around, surprise blooming on his face beneath that heavy mop of black hair. I genuinely don't think he knew quite what to make of this small, teary-eyed attacker. The third one struck him in his head, plonking off to the side, and he figured it out right quick. I just set foot into the grass circle in the center of the ring and cocked back my hand for another throw when my father snatched me up from behind. He pulled me back out of the ring, my face wet with tears and snot, but still I struggled. I was bursting with anger, wounded by the ugliness of what I'd seen in a way that I was too young to articulate properly. "Let me go, let me go. He's going to kill it, Daddy, he's going to kill it," I bawled while kicking for all I was worth. "God damn it, Sheila, this is what happens when you don't teach him how to act around people. I got a damn fool for a boy," my father growled. He didn't throw me down, but he dropped me while maintaining only the grip on the upper part of my arm. My mother wasn't far behind, and she was no happier with me than he was, though for entirely different reasons. "Lord have mercy, you know better than to get into a ring when there's a horse in there. What were you thinking?" my mother yelled, splotches of pink and red riding high on her cheeks as she did. She took my other arm, a little lower than where my father had me on the other side. "That hoss wasn't doing nothing bad, Mama. You can't hit someone if they aren't doing anything bad," I tried to explain with all the fiery conviction a 7-year-old heart could muster. One of the stable hands had caught the young stallion, and Dorset had migrated to the edge of the ring to watch our little family squabble. He cocked one elbow onto the top board of the ring itself and hawked a big spit of tobacco juice off to the side. He must have heard my tearful reasoning, because he tried to explain himself. "You can't let him think you should be afraid of them. You have to teach him you're the one that does the hurting. These ain't people, son. They're beasts, and they have to be broken. Do you understand that?" As I said before, I was small for my age, mostly just skin, bone, and knobby knees. But the explanation lit a fire in me. I pulled the arm my mother was holding free, and even managed to slip my father's grasp down to my wrist, just so I could shout at the top of my lungs. "You are bad." I had not yet, at 7, mastered the fine art of telling a man he was a low-down, dirty, egg-sucking dog. Whack! My father, ever one to believe in the instillment of manners in young men, immediately began to lace into me with a series of quick smacks to my bottom. There's a great deal of overlap in the teaching of horses and young men when it comes to both manners and masters. You do not speak like that. Each word brought a fresh, swift palm against the back of my jeans. My mother appeared, manifesting from somewhere beyond the veil of tears that turned my world into a blurry mess and snatched me away. "What the hell is wrong with you? I'll take him to the truck." My father let me go, and my mother began to lead me back to the truck. The spanking had stung, but the greater pain was a sense of betrayal. At 7, the world was remarkably black and white, and I knew, in my heart of hearts, that Bernie Dorset was a despicable man. I couldn't understand how the people that loved me, and who I loved in return, couldn't see that. "If you bring him back, make sure he stays with you. Real stable ain't no place for a soft-minded boy. I ain't gonna be held responsible for it," Dorset called out as my mother led me away. She stopped, still holding my hand, and looked back over her shoulder. "Fuck you." She got me a cold Pepsi from the cooler in the back of the truck, and sat with me while my father continued to make conversation. I don't remember what they said, couldn't have heard it from inside the truck anyway, but they appeared to laugh and joke. I suspect it was a great deal of Bernie reiterating the many reasons why he had had neither wife nor children. I was inconsolable, a sobbing wreck that would calm for a moment, just long enough to sip soda before sniffling anew. "He's bad. It didn't do anything. How's it supposed to know, Mama? How's it supposed to know?" I begged her to explain it to me. She soothed me as best she could, tasked with the unenviable task that all mothers must eventually face when they have to explain the nature of cruelty in our world. My mom was a strong woman, a smart woman, but she didn't have the answers. All she could do was stroke my hair and hold me. I know he is. After a few minutes, my father began to approach the truck, and when he went to open the driver's side door, my mother leaned over and pushed down the lock. He stood there, baffled and tugging the handle, but then he saw the look in my mom's eyes. That day, she had torn into him for not securing the girth in the saddle. That had been the fear of a young mother bursting through. This was pissed the fuck off. Her lips had pulled into this half-sneer of contempt, and her eyes were as narrow as the edge of a razor. "What the hell? Let me in." She turned to him, and she didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice at all. She just stared back at him with a look on her face and said, "Joey, you're going to go back over there, and you're going to buy that horse." "What? I'm not going to go back over after the boy acted a fool. Are you out of your mind, Sheila?" "Joey, you're going to go back over there. You're going to buy that horse, or when we get down the road, I'm going to snatch your goddamn eyeballs out of your head. Now, if you decide you think I'm lying," my mother told him, as if she were 7 feet tall and built like a prize fighter. Oh, wait, sorry. Damn it. Okay, I got to redo that entire paragraph. My apologies. "Joey, you are going to go back over there, and you're going to buy that horse, or when we get down the road, I'm going to snatch your goddamn eyeballs out of your head. Now you decide if you think I'm lying," my mother told him, as if she were 7 feet tall and built like a prize fighter instead of 5 foot nothing and skinny enough to fear high wind. My father, faced with the shame of going back to Dorset, trying to purchase the young stallion, or calling my mother's bluff and potentially losing his eyes, chose to go back and try to buy the horse. Now, to his credit, though he walked like a sullen child back over to Dorset, he did try. According to my mother, he even told old Bernie Dorset to name his price. He knew he was in trouble with my mom, and I suppose a couple $1,000s is worth dodging that bullet. Unfortunately, real life seldom contains happy endings. Dorset, citing the fact that he was not the horse's owner, declined the sale. His own strange morality, that allowed for the beating of an animal, did not allow for the betrayal of those who paid him. I would see Dorset only one more time in my life, when he and my mother's paths crossed at the Kentucky Celebration. There, in front of thousands of people who had traveled from all over the state, one of the horses that he had trained would find itself in the ring with my mother and Pride's Imperial Prince. There, an animal sculpted by love would face one sculpted by the fist to decide who was the very best. The Kentucky Celebration is like no other horse show held within the Appalachian region. While it is easily understood that the Blue Book shows are more prestigious, and therefore more gentlemanly in their atmosphere than their unranked counterparts, the celebration shames them all. The event is held beyond the coal fields, in the part of Kentucky where the mountains give up and instead become the rolling green hills of horse country. Plantation-style houses, with yards bigger than the neighborhood I live in now, sprawl across the landscape to this day. Lexington is one of the most urban areas in Kentucky, and the flat, posh landscape that surrounds the city is rural only in appearance. At this point, there's a picture of a woman on a horse, based on the caption, Tennessee walking horse competing at the Kentucky Celebration with female rider in full habit. Amid the homes of coal barons, celebrities, and old money is where the Kentucky Celebration is held. The smaller shows that lead to it crop up seemingly anywhere, with podunk towns and remote forgotten locales being the norm. But when it comes time for the finale show, the wealthy want the spectacle to be close at hand. The drive from where we lived, Pikeville, Kentucky, took at least 5 hours with the horse trailer behind us. My father had not qualified to compete in the celebration, but my mother had. She'd spent the week diligently washing Pride's coat with an oatmeal blend she'd made using her own hair care products and a few other ingredients. She even went as far as to trim the hair in Pride's ears and patiently tie blue and white ribbons into his braided mane. I can recall my father getting frustrated with her, because he'd get home from work and find her in the barn shining Pride's hooves up and listening to the radio with me, and having forgotten to fix dinner. She packed me a suitcase full of Mad magazines and old comic books to keep me occupied during both the ride and the nearly 4-hour series of competitions that would precede her own chance to shine. She was to compete for the Women's Championship, which would take place second to last, damn near the main event. This meant we, and her nieces and sisters who had traveled all that way to support her, would likely be among the last people to leave. We were in for a long night, scurrying between our spot at the front of the bleachers and back to the horse trailer. Unlike the little shows we attended, this one was indoors. Not just a horse ring, but a proper arena, where neither the elements nor the vagaries of fate could interfere. There were precious few children to play with at this one, and I thought that strange because there were so many cars and trucks and horse trailers glittering in the sun when we arrived. Surely they all had kids just like me. However, I cannot recall seeing any other children roaming about, and what ones I did happen upon were sitting diligently with their parents. While my father went to take care of paying the entry fee and handling all that paperwork, I was left behind with my mother as she got Pride off the trailer and began to prepare him for the night's show. While there may not have been all that many children, there was an abundance of tack trailers that served as mobile stores, selling everything a rider could possibly need for his or her horse. Men in expensive suits, with their wives dressed to the nines, conversed and made deals with rough men with horse shit in their boots and calluses on their hands. There was big money in the celebration. This was a place where contacts were made and horse flesh traded, a chance for trainers to prove they were worth their money and owners to see their investments pay out. I was sitting on the side of the truck, giggling at Alfred E. Newman's interpretation of Batman, when my Aunt Linda, herself an owner of racking horses, like those my father preferred, returned from a trip to find the bathrooms. A little pear-shaped woman with thick glasses and Velma Dinkley's haircut, she was fanning herself at the night's program. "Lord, you should see some of these horses, Sheila." My mom laughed and paused her preparations. "They are something, aren't they?" Linda eased up to the truck, stood on the tips of her toes, and dug into her cooler in search of a Diet Coke. She glanced over at me and eyed my choice of literary fare for the evening dubiously. "What are you reading, little man?" she asked, squinting and adjusting her glasses to peer over the cover of my Mad magazine. "Books," I told her matter-of-factly. "Uh-huh. Books or funny books?" She had me there, but fortunately I was spared having to try to make that distinction at 7 by the gossip that was no doubt burning her tongue. She opened the Diet Coke and edged back around the horse trailer to where my mother was standing, and I could hear her voice drop to near conspiratorial tones, even though I'm relatively certain with all the ruckus of the celebration that no one could have heard. "I seen Bernie Dorset with them Tackets. They brought that big roan with them. You could hear the poor thing kicking off the walls of its trailer," Linda whispered, as if she were discussing a scandal in Sunday church. "They burned its feet up? You know not." "Well, I mean, who can really tell? Probably wrapped him in liniment last night. Just enough of the soreness will be gone by showtime for them to pass the judges." Now, I cannot say with any certainty that Dorset and the family who used him to train their horses actually sored that roan. And the Kentucky Celebration's judges are known to be both stern and fair. What I can say is there are dozens of ways to rig the system, avoid detection, and cheat, some of which are quite nefarious or even cruel. Bernie Dorset knew them all, and he had a wall full of trophies sitting behind glass to prove it. At such a young age, I lacked the focus to pay much attention to most of the competitions. I was far more interested in the acquisition of hot dogs, moon pies, following the exploits of Spider-Man, and napping in the truck. I have very little recollection of the time leading up to my mother's chance to shine. I do remember her waking me up, leaning into the truck, dressed in her rider's habit, and kissing me on the forehead. "Wish your old mom luck, bub," she said as she wiped away the lipstick stain left on my forehead with her thumb. Pride passed by the truck, led by my mother, the black English-style saddle that my mother favored, oiled and supple. By the time that I had rubbed the sleep from my eyes, my father was opening the truck's door to lift me out, balancing me on his arm as I hugged his neck. All my aunts and cousins had already filtered inside the arena, and now my father carried me to where they sat in the arena. We were right up front, close enough that you could smell the horse sweat soaked into the dirt. The announcer came over the PA. "Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for this year's Women's Performance Shod Tennessee Walking Horse finalists." The crowd, consisting of an eclectic mix of both the social elite, hard-nosed trainers, would-be buyers, and followers of the sport, all broke into a thunderous cheer. The competitors entered the ring one at a time, immediately falling into their circular course around the track. Again, this was no race, but a competition based on poise, beauty, and skill. My mother, dressed in her black habit and sitting upon the back of the finest Tennessee walker to have ever made a meal of Pike County grass, was fifth out the gate. Pride's Imperial Prince, even before she put him through his paces, came out with his ears perked and his neck bowed, his chin nearly laid against his chest. Though I would not ever want to cast aspersion on the integrity of a Kentucky Celebration judge, and though I know the details of the memory have been blunted by the passage of long years, I certainly think I saw the judge smile in approval. "Let's go, Sheila." "Yeah, Judge, yeah, that's your horse, right there, Judge." We all screamed, shouted, hooted, and whistled as she went by, and many others, who had no affiliation with us at all, did the same. Pride was a magnificent animal, pampered and spoiled with my mom's love and my father's money. On his back was not just a rider, but the one person in this world that he genuinely loved. You may believe, if you wish, that skill alone made my mother sit so high and true in the saddle, but, if you ask me, it was the bond she and Pride shared that gave them their edge. Pride would do whatever my mother wanted him to do in that ring, not because he was afraid of the consequences of disobeying, but because he wanted to. The roan that Dorset trained entered the ring much later, at least 10th, and when it did, another round of applause came with the first steps of its hooves on the dirt. I do not recall the rider's name, and I would not have known it if not for the discussions of my kin. The horse itself was the color of wood smoke, his mane black like soot, and he was a full 2 hands taller than Pride was. There was no fat on the roan, just lean, marbled muscle, and as it passed by the bleachers, the auburn-haired rider brought the horse into a show step even before the judges called for it. The horse's name was Shadow's Wandering Delight, and with that first display of showmanship, my mother's odds of victory diminished considerably. When the final horse had filtered in and the gate closed behind them, the show began in earnest. The competition had nothing to do with speed or laps. It was about form, beauty, and poise. A rider and his horse faced the toughest scrutiny imaginable from the judges, and as they prepared to call for their first gate, the crowd settled into a captivated silence. Discreetly, one of the judges leaned over to the announcer, who was standing dutifully by their side, cupped his hand to hide his mouth, and whispered in the announcer's ear. "Riders, the judges would like to see a running walk, please. Running walk, please. Running walk," the announcer's voice rang out over the PA. The running walk is an inherited gait of the Tennessee walking horse and cannot be taught. A flat, 4-beat gait that incorporates a gliding motion, the rhythmic bobbing of the horse's head, and the timed swinging even of its ears. In most horse shows, a kind judge would have called for a walk to give the riders and their horses a moment to acclimate to the ring. But this was the celebration. The stakes were higher, and so too was the difficulty of the task. My family exploded with cheers when Pride's Imperial Prince rounded the ring, high-stepping in the front, back end low and set to a smooth slide. This, however, was Pride's shortcoming. He was smaller than many of the other horses in the ring, and it made the upward pull and flick of those front feet look considerably less dramatic than they have otherwise appeared. The walking run was not Pride's strongest display. He had too many physical strikes against him for it to be otherwise. Shadow's Wandering Delight and his auburn-haired rider, probably 10 years younger than my mother at the time, had no such handicap. When that horse surrounded the ring, he moved like a storm front. His steps were as high as a man's head, and his back end so low that his tail nearly swept the dirt. He wasn't just good, he was perfect. And while my family had cheered for my mother as she made the circle, the whole damn place cheered for Shadow's Wandering Delight. The rider could have fallen dead from his back, and he'd carried on, likely as could be to win, and everyone knew it. This continued till the judge got an eyeful of each contestant. With a whisper, he called for the next gate. "Riders, horse to a slow walk, please. Slow walk." The slow walk is the natural gait of the walking horse, with a much more relaxed than its running counterpart. This gait is all about seeing how the rider looks upon the back of their mount, how relaxed and at ease they seem in the saddle, and how the horse responds beneath them. A sudden shift from a faster gait to the slow walk can make an unruly horse lose its nerve, and if a rider has forgotten some minute detail of their habit, or the horse's saddle, this is where the judge finds it. Pride may not have had the size to kick his step up like the other horses during a running walk, but during the slow walk he became the epitome of silky smooth. When the flashing of cameras and the cheers of people around the arena would have sent a lesser horse to rearing, Pride's Imperial Prince all but strutted. He was comfortable with my mom on his back. He knew that he was safe with her, and she with him. And if Shadow's Wandering Delight had been perfection, then Pride, in that moment, was like a kintsugi vase, made somehow beyond perfect by the infusion of love into the cracks that might have held them back. When my mother passed us again, it wasn't just us cheering for her this time. Shadow's Wandering Delight was not to be outdone. He was bigger than Pride, but he moved with the precision of a soldier. Everything was neat, lockstepped, and exceptionally tidy. If Pride's gait was smooth like butter, then it would also be fair to say that Shadow's Wandering Delight's gait was clean like a blade. I remember the grim line of determination on his rider's mouth, unlike my mother's. She wasn't smiling. Out of nowhere, Shadow's Wandering Delight jerked his head to the right, tugging against his rider. She quickly recovered, and the horse didn't miss a step and went right back into his gait. He had pulled, though, but it was anyone's guess as to whether or not the judge had seen it, or if his attention had been on any of the other horses. The judge whispered to the announcer again, but this time he pointed to 5 horses, one of which was Pride, another of which was Shadow, and then he took a step back. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for this year's competitors. Now, the judge would like the following horses and their riders to report to the center of the ring. The judge eliminated every other rider, and now it was down to the final 5. The real fight began. With the pressure turned up to its highest point, the horse slick with sweat, and the riders having already held it together through numerous loops around the ring, they were called to do it all over again. Just as before, when it came time for the running walk, there was not a horse alive in Kentucky that could have held a candle to Shadow's wandering delight. Just as before, the crowd cheered and hooted. Unlike before, during the slow walk phase, Shadow made no mistakes. Then the judge called for the last gate of the competition, the incredibly difficult and disastrous to the untrained cantering gate. The cantering gate, sometimes known as the rocking chair canter, is a 3-beat gait utilizing left or right lead. In the canter, the horse will lift the forepart of its hooves, giving an easy rise and fall motion to its whole body. In the hands of a skilled rider, it can be one of the most breathtaking displays of harmonious skill that you ever see. In the hands of an unskilled rider, you'll likely see them eat dirt. That rolling motion can and will throw you. Understand, Pride hated the canter. My mom hated the canter. Working on teaching Pride to canter is part of what had brought us to Bernie Dorset's doorstep in the first place. Pride didn't like to do it, but Mom had worked with him tirelessly. I'm sure that Bernie Dorset worked tirelessly with Shadow's Wandering Delight. The difference being, I doubted there were very many apples in Shadow's training program. If you believe in nothing else, believe in this. When Pride's Imperial Prince came around that ring in his rocking canter, my mom just scant few inches off the saddle and supporting herself with the stirrups. That little horse laid his heart down. His every motion in perfect time, the ribbons kicking back in his braided mane, and not a single twitch or misstep could touch him. That little horse would not lose, not because he had been trained harder. He hadn't. He was spoiled rotten, actually. He wouldn't lose because she didn't want him to lose. He had never known the crop. He'd never faced the spur. And maybe Bernie Dorset could have turned him into an absolute winning machine. But my mother had gauged the cost of that on her soul as too high. It was beautiful. I've searched long and hard for a better word. But there's no better word, even though beautiful is shamed by its inadequacy. Shadow's Wandering Delight would not be silenced that easily, not without his showing. And though my memory is no doubt tainted by bias, I cannot help but remember how much more forceful his canter seemed. Everything that Pride did was smooth. Even his canter, which he hated, was smooth. But everything Shadow did was forceful and strong. I know it's silly to ascribe such meaning to events, but I cannot help but think the difference was that Shadow's Wandering Delight raged against losing, and Pride simply loved making my mother happy. At last, they were summoned once more to the middle of the ring. The judge in a horse show doesn't announce the first place winner first. They work their way up from the bottom instead, dismissing each contestant in turn until only the winner remains. One by one, the other horses were given their ribbons and their moment in the sun, and one by one they were dismissed, until at the very end there were only 3. When they called Shadow's Wandering Delight's name for the second place spot, even my father, of who I have few fond memories and fewer instances of recollection that involve tears other than my own, had to turn his face so that he could wipe his eyes. The whole place went up in cheers, and as Pride made his victory lap around the ring, my mom doing her best to keep from crying herself, I think that might just be the happiest I ever saw her. The heart had beaten the fist. Some years later, Dorset would meet his untimely end beneath the hoof of a rearing horse. He wasn't wrong about how dangerous the animals can be when they decide they don't like you. He was just wrong that making them afraid was the answer. This is where we would fade to black, as if it were, or if it were a movie. This is where the story would stop if it were to have a happy ending. Unfortunately, life isn't a story, and it just keeps rolling on. My mother and father would remain together for another year before a nasty divorce, in which my father famously told my mother that she could have me or her belongings, but not both, and left my mom destitute. He ended up giving her Pride back because Pride had taken to kicking the boards out of his barn stall without her. Mom worked 2 jobs. One of them was a bartender in my grandmother's club, and the other was at J&S Feed. She'd run the feed store until 6, go home, take a shower, and then go right to working at the bar just to make sure I had what I needed, and Pride got what he needed. We built a barn to keep from having to pay stable fees. It was small, and it didn't have a lick of paint, but it was dry. We even fenced in a little lot so that Pride could pick grass during the spring, and every morning when she would take me to school, even as a teenager, Pride would have his head hung out from the barn door, nickering when he smelled my mother's perfume. The feed store work involved moving heavy bags of grain and bales of hay. One day, my mother went to move one of the bags, and the discs in her back tore themselves apart. After some time in the hospital, she found out that she had a degenerative disc disease that was destroying the cushion between her vertebrae. If she took a hard jolt or fall, there was a chance her back would literally come apart from her tailbone. She spent all day at the barn when they told her that, looking at her trophies and her saddles that she'd eventually won back from my father. I think I was on the way back from playing basketball with some of the local boys when I saw her there. "You want me to feed him tonight?" I called out. She was rubbing his muzzle and had her head against the big white spot between his eyes. When she heard me, she wiped away her tears and looked back, smiled, despite the crushing of her heart. "No, I was just telling Pride he's going to have to get used to retirement." He did, actually. He got fat and woolly and never had to worry about competing. We were poor, though. Very poor. And the thing about being poor is that you only get more poor. As the years went by, as Mom got sicker and the money got leaner, it became increasingly difficult to keep everything running. My mom went without all the fine things she'd had when my father was around, just so I could have what I needed, and also just so she could keep Pride. One day, shortly before my grandmother got sick and moved in with us, adding to the financial strain, she told my mom she'd heard that the Tackett's horse, Shadow's Wandering Delight, had died in his stall. They would have had to hire a loader to pull the heavy horse from where it lay, and then use the same loader to dig its grave. My mom realized she'd never again had the money to pay for that, and if Pride died in that stall, there'd be only one way to get him out, and that was in pieces. She couldn't have that, wouldn't have that, refused to even conceive of it. So, she made a deal with one of her old horse show friends to take Pride and let him live out the rest of the days on her land on the condition he never be shown again and that he never be whipped. She agreed and said that within the week she'd be there to collect my mom's old friend. I woke up early one morning when the mountains of Kentucky are heavy with gray fog and stillness lay on everything like a blanket. Mom always woke up before I did, and when I couldn't find her in the house, it occurred to me to look outside. There she was, on Pride's back, making a slow circle around that little lot we'd built for him. She'd put his ribbons back in his hair. There was no one out there to see it. No one knew. I didn't even tell her that I saw. I just watched from the little glass window in our front door as she took him one last time around a ring. I don't think she cared if it broke her back. I don't even know how she could have possibly hefted the saddle onto his back, but she did. That's love. That's the last ride of Pride's Imperial Prince. You all take care.